Single dad veteran's Tinder date, ghosted him her mom, begged him to give her another chance. But when that heartbroken soldier opened the door and saw a trembling mother on his porch, begging for forgiveness, he had no idea her secret would change everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and second chances. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The glow of the television cast flickering shadows across Luke Tanner's living room as another episode of MAS x H played out. He'd seen this one before, probably dozens of times, but the familiar dialogue provided a comfortable background noise to his thoughts. His weathered hands absently traced the arm of his recliner, the leather worn smooth from years of use. Across the room, Sarah's empty chair sat like a silent reminder. The yarn basket that once overflowed with half-finished projects was long gone, but Luke could still picture his late wife there, needles clicking softly as she worked on yet another sweater for Emily. "Dad?" Emily's voice drifted down from upstairs. "Can you help me with something?" "Sure thing, kiddo." Luke pushed himself up from his chair, his knees creaking slightly. At 48, he wasn't old, but sometimes his body reminded him he wasn't young anymore either. He found Emily in her room, cross-legged on her bed with her laptop open. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore her favorite oversized Cedar Ridge High sweatshirt. She had her mother's warm brown eyes and kind smile. "What's the homework crisis?" Luke asked, leaning against the doorframe. Emily's lips curved into a mischievous grin. "Actually, it's not homework. I want to show you something." She patted the spot next to her on the bed. Luke's eyebrows rose, but he sat down beside her. "Why do I feel like I'm walking into a trap?" "Because you have good instincts," Emily laughed. She turned her laptop screen toward him. "Welcome to Tinder." "Oh no." Luke started to stand up. "Absolutely not." Emily caught his arm. "Dad, come on. Just hear me out." "I'm too old for all that nonsense," Luke protested. "Dating apps are for kids your age, which, by the way, you better not be using." "First of all, I'm 16, not stupid." Emily rolled her eyes. "And second, lots of people your age use dating apps. It's totally normal now." Luke ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. I appreciate what you're trying to do. But what?" Emily's voice softened. "Dad, it's been 5 years since Mom died, and I see how lonely you are." The words hit Luke like a physical blow. He started to deny it, but the knowing look in his daughter's eyes stopped him. She was too perceptive for her own good sometimes. "I'm fine," he said instead. "I've got you. My work at the nonprofit, my friends." "And you deserve more than fine," Emily insisted. She clicked through a few screens. "Look, I already made you a profile." "You what?" "Don't worry, it's very dignified." She showed him the screen. "See? Marine veteran, nonprofit director, coffee enthusiast, dad to an awesome teenager." Despite himself, Luke chuckled. "Well, that last part's true at least." Emily beamed. "Just try it. Please? For me?" Luke looked at his daughter's hopeful face and felt his resistance crumbling. She had her mother's way of getting through his defenses. 1 hour, he conceded. "That's it." "Yes." Emily bounced excitedly on the bed. "Okay, so you swipe right if you're interested. Left if you're not." The next 45 minutes were equal parts awkward and amusing as Emily coached him through the basics of modern dating apps. Luke felt ridiculous at first, but gradually got into the rhythm of it. Most profiles seemed nice enough, but nothing clicked. Then Samantha Reyes's profile appeared. Her smile was gentle, genuine. Brown eyes that crinkled at the corners. Dark hair with a few strands of silver she hadn't bothered to hide. Her bio mentioned graphic design work, volunteering at her church's food bank, and a love of old movies. Something about her seemed real. "She's pretty," Emily commented carefully. Luke realized he'd been staring at the profile longer than usual. "She seems nice." "Nice?" Emily grinned. "Dad, you haven't stopped smiling since her picture came up." "I'm not." Luke touched his face, surprised to find he was indeed smiling. "Well, what do I do now?" "Swipe right." Luke's thumb hovered over the screen. I don't know. Oh my gosh, Dad, just... She reached over and swiped right before he could stop her. Emily. There. Now we wait to see if she... A cheerful chime interrupted her. She matched. She liked your profile too. Luke stared at the screen, his heart suddenly pounding like he was a teenager himself. A message appeared. Hi, Luke. I loved what you wrote about your nonprofit work. Would love to hear more about it. Dad. Emily nudged him. Answer her. What do I say? Just be yourself, honest and nice, like you always are. Luke took a deep breath and typed, Hi, Samantha. Thank you. The work means a lot to me. I saw that you volunteer too? The response came quickly. Yes, my church's food bank every weekend. Nothing as impressive as running a nonprofit, though. Before Luke knew it, they were deep in conversation. Samantha was easy to talk to, asking thoughtful questions and sharing her own stories. They discovered a shared love of classic films, terrible dad jokes, and mint chocolate chip ice cream. When she mentioned losing her father years ago, Luke found himself opening up about Sarah in a way he rarely did. See? Emily said softly, watching him type. That wasn't so scary, was it? Luke glanced at the clock, surprised to find almost 2 hours had passed. I should probably get some sleep. You too. It's still a school night. Okay, but you'll keep talking to her, right? Luke looked at the last message from Samantha, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. Yeah, I think I will. After saying goodnight to Emily, Luke retreated to his room. He sat on the edge of his bed, phone in hand, and looked up at the ceiling. Lord, he whispered, I could use some courage here. He smiled, surprising himself with how natural it felt. And, thank you for stubborn daughters who don't take no for an answer. Warm morning light streamed through the kitchen window, painting golden squares on the worn linoleum floor. Luke Tanner stood at the counter, watching his coffee maker sputter and drip, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. His phone buzzed on the counter, and he picked it up, squinting at the bright screen. Good morning, soldier, read the message from Samantha. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. His thumbs hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he typed, At ease, ma'am. Hope you slept well. Emily bounced into the kitchen, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Dad, are you actually smiling at your phone? This is huge. Luke quickly pocketed his device, trying to look stern but failing. Don't you have a bus to catch, young lady? Not for 15 minutes. She grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. So, tell me about her. What's her name? What does she do? Her name is Samantha, Luke said, pouring coffee into his Marine Corps mug. She's a graphic designer. And? Emily perched on a kitchen stool, clearly not planning to leave without details. Luke sighed, but his eyes crinkled with amusement. And she's kind, smart, has a good sense of humor. Throughout that day, messages flew back and forth between Luke and Samantha. During his lunch break at Operation New Start, he found himself sharing more than he had with anyone in years. Lost Sarah 5 years ago to cancer, he typed, sitting in his small office. Some days it feels like yesterday. Samantha's response came quickly. I'm so sorry, Luke. Losing someone you love changes you forever. My dad. He struggled after coming home from deployment. We lost him 2 years ago. That evening, as Luke worked on budget reports, his phone rang. Samantha's name lit up the screen. His heart did a little jump as he answered. I hope it's okay that I called, she said, her voice warm and slightly nervous. Sometimes, typing just isn't enough. More than okay, Luke replied, leaning back in his chair. To be honest, I was getting tired of thumb typing. They talked for over an hour. Samantha told him about growing up in Cedar Ridge, about her father's struggles with PTSD, about her work creating websites for local businesses. Luke shared stories about Emily, about his years in the Marines, about the veterans he helped now through his nonprofit. Their nightly calls became a routine. Luke found himself looking forward to them, planning his evenings around them. They'd discuss everything from favorite movies to deeper matters of faith and purpose. You know what I miss most about Dad? Samantha said one night. The way he'd sing old country songs while working in the garage. Even when things got bad, he never stopped singing. Sarah used to knit, Luke shared. his voice soft. She'd make these incredible sweaters, always working on 3 or 4 at once. The house felt warmer somehow, watching her create something from nothing. Emily started calling Samantha his mystery woman, wiggling her eyebrows whenever his phone rang. "Dad's got a girlfriend," she'd sing-song, ducking away from his playful swats. "She's not my girlfriend." Luke would protest, but he couldn't hide his smile when Samantha's messages came through. One evening, while they discussed their favorite local coffee shops, Samantha's message made Luke's heart skip. "We should meet in person. This Saturday, at the Lakeside Cafe, 7 p.m.? Luke stared at his phone, his coffee growing cold beside him. The prospect of meeting face to face both thrilled and terrified him. He hadn't been on a proper date since before Sarah got sick. Taking a deep breath, he typed, "I'd like that." "It's a date then," came her reply, followed by a smiling emoji. Luke stood up and walked to the kitchen calendar hanging by the fridge. With slightly shaking hands, he picked up a pen and drew a circle around Saturday's date. 7 o'clock. Lakeside Cafe. His heart pounded as he stared at the marked date, reality setting in. "Dad?" Emily's voice startled him. She stood in the doorway, grinning. "Are you finally going to meet her?" Luke nodded, still looking at the calendar. Saturday night. Emily rushed over and hugged him tight. "I'm so proud of you, Dad," she whispered against his chest. He hugged her back, grateful for her support, trying to quiet the nervous flutter in his stomach. After 5 years of lonely dinners and quiet evenings, he was finally taking a step forward. The calendar hung on the wall, Saturdays circled bold and promising, marking what felt like the beginning of something new. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Luke's driveway as he ran the chamois cloth over his truck's hood one final time. The red paint gleamed like it hadn't in years. He stepped back, wiping his hands on his old work jeans, and checked his watch. 5 o'clock, 2 hours until the date. "Dad, you've been cleaning that truck for an hour," Emily called from the front porch, amusement in her voice. "I think it's as shiny as it's gonna get." Luke glanced up at his daughter, trying to hide his nervousness behind a shrug. "Just want to make a good impression, that's all." Inside, Luke stood before his bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of his blue button-down shirt. His hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with the buttons. From the back of his closet drawer, he pulled out a small bottle of cologne, the one Sarah had given him on their last anniversary together. The scent brought back memories, but for the first time, they didn't sting quite as much. "You look handsome, Dad," Emily said, from his doorway. She walked over and straightened his collar with gentle hands. "Mom would want you to be happy, you know." Luke's throat tightened. "I know, sweetie." The drive to Lakeside Cafe took 15 minutes, but Luke left early, not wanting to risk being late. The parking lot was half full when he arrived at 6:45. Through the cafe's front windows, warm light spilled onto the sidewalk. Luke chose a spot near the entrance, making sure his truck was visible from inside. The hostess, a friendly woman named Betty who knew him from his regular coffee runs, led him to a small table by the window. "Special occasion tonight?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Meeting someone," Luke managed, his mouth dry. "Coffee while you wait?" "Please." The minutes ticked by slowly. Luke kept his phone on the table, screen up, checking it every few minutes to make sure he hadn't missed a message. 7 came and went. He sipped his coffee, watching each new customer who walked through the door. At 7:30, Betty brought him a fresh cup. "On the house, hun," she said softly, her eyes kind. "Thanks." Luke forced a smile, his stomach churning. He watched couples at nearby tables laughing together, sharing desserts, living their normal lives. The cafe's warm atmosphere felt increasingly suffocating. 8 arrived, then 8:15. Luke's coffee had gone cold, untouched. His phone remained silent. No messages, no calls, no explanation. Betty approached again, concern etched on her face. "Can I get you anything else?" Luke shook his head, reaching for his wallet. "Just the check, please." "It's taken care of," she said quietly. "You come back for breakfast soon, okay?" The pity in her voice made his chest ache. "Thanks, Betty." The drive home felt longer than usual. Luke kept the radio off, letting the silence fill the cab of his truck. The same question circled in his mind. Had he said something wrong? Had she changed her mind about meeting a veteran? Or was this all just some cruel joke? The house was dark when he pulled into the driveway, except for the soft glow of the living room lamp. Emily sat curled up on the couch, pretending to read a book. She looked up as he entered, her face hopeful until she saw his expression. "Didn't go well?" she asked softly. Luke hung his keys on the hook by the door, trying to keep his voice steady. "Guess she changed her mind." Emily set her book down, concern filling her young face. "She didn't show up at all?" "It's okay, sweetheart," Luke said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "These things happen, but that's not okay," Emily protested. She could have at least sent a message. Luke cut her off gently. "I'm tired. Think I'm gonna turn in early." In his bedroom, Luke pulled out his phone one last time. Still no messages. With heavy fingers, he opened the Tinder app and pressed Delete Account. A warning message popped up. "Are you sure?" Without hesitation, he confirmed. He changed out of his nice shirt, hanging it back in the closet next to Sarah's old dresses. The cologne bottle went back into the drawer, probably for good this time. As he lay in bed, the house seemed to press in around him, emptier and colder than before. Through the wall, he could hear Emily in her room, probably texting her friends. His brave, beautiful daughter, who just wanted him to be happy. He'd have to do better tomorrow, be stronger, show her that he was okay. But tonight, just for tonight, he let himself feel the weight of disappointment crushing his chest. Luke stared at the ceiling, memories of Sarah mixing with thoughts of what might have been with Samantha. The digital clock on his nightstand blinked 10:30, then 11, then midnight, as sleep remained stubbornly out of reach. Luke hammered another nail into the loose fence board, each strike echoing his frustration like a percussion of disappointment. The November wind whipped around him with relentless fury, carrying dead leaves across his front yard in spiraling dances that mirrored his unsettled thoughts. His breath came out in visible puffs as he worked, the cold air burning his lungs while he tried to lose himself in the familiar rhythm of physical labor rather than dwelling on Saturday night's crushing disappointment. The repetitive motion of hammer meeting nail had always been his go-to remedy for emotional turmoil. During the worst days after Sarah's death, he'd rebuilt half the back deck just to keep his hands busy and his mind from wandering into dark places. Today felt similar. The sting of rejection mixing with embarrassment and self-doubt in a cocktail he was determined to sweat out through honest work. The sound of tires crunching on his gravel driveway made him pause mid-swing. A silver Volvo sedan, immaculately kept but showing the subtle signs of being at least a decade old, pulled up beside his weathered pickup truck. Luke straightened slowly, wiping his work-roughened hands on his faded jeans as an elegant older woman emerged from the driver's seat with careful, deliberate movements. She wore a navy blue wool coat that spoke of quality and care, its brass buttons catching the weak November sunlight. Despite the coat's obvious age, it was pristine, the kind of garment that gets passed down through generations because it was built to last. She carried herself with dignified grace, her posture straight and purposeful, but Luke could see worry etched in the lines around her eyes and the slight tremor in her gloved hands. Her silver hair was swept back in an elegant style that reminded him of old Hollywood actresses, and she approached with measured steps, each one deliberate as if she were rehearsing what she planned to say. "Mr. Tanner?" Her voice was gentle but carried an underlying strength that spoke of a woman who had weathered storms and emerged with her grace intact. "I'm Margaret Reyes, Samantha's mother." Luke's grip tightened on his hammer until his knuckles went white. A dozen. Emotions fought for control in his chest. Anger at being stood up, hurt at feeling foolish, curiosity about this unexpected visitor. But his years of Marine discipline kept his expression carefully neutral. He'd learned long ago to control his reactions, to never let the enemy see weakness or uncertainty. "Mrs. Reyes." His voice came out rougher than he intended, gravelly from the cold air and the weight of unspoken questions. "I know this is completely unexpected," Margaret said, clasping her hands together in front of her, as if steadying herself for what came next. And I understand completely if you want nothing to do with us after Saturday night. But I needed to come here, to explain, to apologize for my daughter's behavior." From the corner of his eye, Luke noticed Emily appear on the front porch, drawn by the sound of unfamiliar voices. His daughter hung back near the door, watching with the kind of concern that reminded him how perceptive she was, how she always seemed to sense when something important was happening. Her presence was both comforting and slightly embarrassing. He didn't relish the idea of having his romantic failures witnessed by his teenage daughter. Margaret took a deep breath, the cold air making her pause as she gathered her thoughts. Samantha had a severe panic attack that night. She discovered you were a veteran, and it triggered something she's been struggling with for years. Luke's brow furrowed in confusion. "Ma'am, I was upfront about my service record from the very beginning. It was in my profile, mentioned in our first conversation. Yes." But Margaret's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, revealing the raw pain beneath her polished exterior. Sometimes knowing something in your head and truly facing it with your heart are two completely different things. You see, my husband, Samantha's father, was a Vietnam veteran. He struggled with PTSD for years after returning home, battled demons that none of us could fully understand. 10 years ago, he took his own life. The hammer felt suddenly heavy in Luke's hand, like it had gained 50 pounds in an instant. He set it down on the fence post with deliberate care, the solid thud somehow too loud in the quiet morning, echoing off the bare trees that surrounded his property. "Samantha found him," Margaret continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, as if speaking the words too loudly might give them more power to hurt. "She was 28, just starting to build her own life, her own career. She came home from work early that day, wanted to surprise him with his favorite dessert from the bakery downtown. Instead, Margaret's voice broke completely, and she had to pause to compose herself. Luke felt his chest tighten with a familiar ache. He knew that particular brand of discovery, that moment when normal life crashes into unbearable reality. He'd found Sarah collapsed in their bedroom, and even though cancer had been slowly stealing her away for months, nothing could have prepared him for that final, devastating moment of loss. "She's carried that trauma ever since," Margaret continued when she found her voice again. "The guilt, the what-ifs, the fear that she somehow failed him. When it came time to actually meet you, to sit across from another veteran and risk caring about someone who might be fighting the same battles her father lost, she couldn't separate her fear of losing someone else the same way from the wonderful man she'd gotten to know through your conversations." Luke ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath his palm and the cold sting of wind against his exposed skin. His anger was melting like ice in warm water, replaced by a complicated mix of understanding and uncertainty. How many times had his own fears kept him from taking chances, from reaching out when he should have stepped back? "She's in therapy," Margaret added quickly, as if sensing his hesitation. "Has been for years, working hard to heal and move forward. She's made so much progress, but sometimes, especially when the stakes feel high, the fear still wins." She reached into her coat pocket with shaking fingers and withdrew a folded piece of paper, creased from careful handling. "Please, Mr. Tanner, give her another chance. She's a good girl, just scared of losing someone else she cares about." The wind picked up suddenly, rattling the loose fence boards and sending dried leaves skittering across the yard like tiny tumbleweeds. Luke stood silent for a long moment, processing everything he'd heard while watching Margaret's hopeful, anxious expression. He thought about his own struggles after losing Sarah, the countless times fear had kept him from moving forward, from accepting help, from admitting he needed something more than just surviving each day. "Dad?" Emily's voice came soft from the porch, gentle but encouraging. She'd moved closer during the conversation, her teenage wisdom shining in her eyes as she watched the scene unfold. "Maybe you should listen to what she has to say." Luke looked at his daughter, so wise beyond her 16 years, so much like her mother in her ability to see straight to the heart of things, then back at Margaret, who stood waiting with dignity and hope written in every line of her face. He saw in her expression the same fierce protective love he felt for Emily every single day. Understood the courage it must have taken to drive here, to stand on a stranger's property and bear her family's deepest wounds in hopes of healing them. Margaret held out the folded paper with trembling fingers. This is her number. The real one. Not just through the app. What you choose to do with it, that's entirely up to you. But I wanted you to know that every word she shared with you was genuine. Every laugh, every story, every moment of connection. It was all real. Sometimes the truest hearts are the most frightened ones, Mr. Tanner. Luke accepted the paper with careful hands, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to carry such enormous possibility. The wind tugged at its edges, like it was trying to make the decision for him. Margaret turned to leave, her mission completed, with the quiet dignity of someone who had done everything she could and was prepared to accept whatever came next. She paused at her car door, looking back once with eyes that held a lifetime of hope and heartbreak. Thank you for listening, Mr. Tanner, for giving an old woman the chance to fight for her daughter's happiness. He watched the Volvo pull away slowly, its taillights disappearing around the bend that led back to town. Then he looked down at the folded note in his weathered hand, feeling Emily's presence beside him like an anchor in uncertain waters. The paper seemed to pulse with possibility and risk in equal measure. "What am I supposed to do with this?" he whispered, his voice nearly lost in the November wind that made the paper tremble in his grasp like a living thing. Luke sat at his kitchen table early the next morning, staring at his phone. The coffee in his mug had gone cold, untouched. Margaret's visit yesterday had thrown him off balance, and sleep had been elusive. The folded note with Samantha's number lay before him like a challenge. Emily shuffled into the kitchen in her pajamas, her hair tousled from sleep. She poured herself a bowl of cereal and watched her father's internal struggle play across his face. "You know," she said between bites, "sometimes the bravest thing isn't charging forward, it's giving someone a second chance." Luke glanced up at his daughter, struck by her wisdom. She had her mother's way of cutting straight to the heart of things. With a deep breath, he picked up his phone and typed, "Heard from your mom. Coffee?" The 3 dots appeared immediately, making his heart skip. Then, "I'd like that." 2 hours later, Luke pulled into the Lakeside Cafe parking lot. The place was quieter now, with the lunch rush over. Through the window, he spotted Samantha at a corner table, wearing a blue sweater and fidgeting with a paper napkin. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable than he'd imagined from their previous conversations. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. Samantha's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and fear. Luke approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hi," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hi," he replied, settling into the chair across from her. The waitress brought them coffee, and Samantha wrapped her trembling hands around the warm mug. Her fingers were adorned with simple silver rings, and Luke noticed she kept twisting them, a nervous habit. "I'm so sorry," she began, her voice cracking. "I know I owe you an explanation, and it's going to sound crazy, but your mom told me about your father," Luke said gently. Tears welled up in Samantha's eyes. "I thought I was ready. I really did. But when I looked you up online and saw the veterans' charity you run," she dabbed at her eyes with the crumpled napkin. It all came rushing back. Dad's uniform, the folded flag, the way he couldn't sleep for weeks before. Luke nodded, understanding flowing through him. PTSD's a heavy burden, not just for the ones carrying it, but for everyone who loves them. "You understand?" she asked, looking up at him. "More than you know." Luke took a slow sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "After my 3rd tour, I couldn't handle 4th of July fireworks. My wife, Sarah, she'd find me in the garage some nights, just sitting in the dark. I pushed everyone away for a while, convinced I was protecting them from the mess in my head." Samantha's hand steadied slightly. "What changed?" "Sarah refused to let me hide. Said God didn't design us to carry our burdens alone." Luke's voice softened at the memory. She was right. The more I opened up, the lighter it got. "I've spent years in therapy," Samantha admitted, "trying to understand why Dad couldn't stay For me? For Mom? Sometimes I think I've moved past it, and then something triggers me, and I'm right back there, that 16-year-old girl getting the news. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the afternoon sun casting warm patterns on their table. Other customers came and went, but in their corner, time seemed to slow down. You know what the hardest part is? Samantha continued. The guilt. For running away Saturday night. For letting fear win again. You didn't deserve that. Hey, Luke leaned forward, his voice firm but kind. We've all got scars, Samantha. Some are just more visible than others. The important thing is, you're here, now. She smiled through her tears. Thank you for giving me another chance. Most people wouldn't have. Well, I've got a pretty wise teenager at home who convinced me it was worth it. Their conversation flowed easier after that, moving from heavy topics to lighter ones. They discovered shared tastes in music, a mutual love of old movies, and the same terrible habit of reading the last page of books first. Hours passed unnoticed. When the waitress started stacking chairs on tables, they realized it was time to go. In the parking lot, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. This was. Samantha searched for the right word. Better than Saturday? Luke offered with a gentle smile. She laughed, the sound bright and genuine. Definitely better than Saturday. As Luke drove home, his phone rang through the truck's speakers. Emily's name flashed on the display. So? She asked immediately. How did it go? Luke smiled faintly, thinking of the afternoon's conversations. Better than I expected. His phone buzzed with a text message. At the next red light, he glanced down to see Samantha's words. Thank you for not giving up. The Saturday morning sun painted Cedar Ridge Park in warm autumn colors. Luke arrived early, his truck loaded with folding tables and coolers for the Operation New Start Veterans Picnic. As he set up, his hands moved with practiced efficiency, but his mind wandered to Samantha. He'd been surprised when she agreed to come help. Need a hand with those tables? Called a familiar voice. Luke turned to find Samantha walking toward him, wearing jeans and a light blue sweater. Her dark hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she carried a large container of what smelled like homemade cookies. You didn't have to bring anything, Luke said, smiling despite himself. My grandmother always said never show up empty-handed. She set the container down. Besides, I stress bake when I'm nervous. Nervous? About what? About. She gestured vaguely at the park, where a few veterans were already gathering. I haven't been around many veterans since. You know, Luke's expression softened. Hey, these are good people. Just be yourself. Emily arrived then, rushing over from where she'd been setting up the drink station. Samantha, you came. She hugged her enthusiastically. Did you bring those chocolate chip cookies you mentioned? The morning unfolded naturally after that. More veterans arrived with their families, filling the park with laughter and conversation. Luke watched as Samantha helped serve food, her initial nervousness melting away as she chatted with everyone. Your friend's got a good heart, commented Jerry, one of the older vets Luke had helped get back on his feet. Reminds me of my Sarah, God rest her soul. Luke nodded, watching as Samantha listened intently to a young veteran's story about adjusting to civilian life. She had a way of making people feel heard, her brown eyes warm with genuine interest. Emily bounced between helping and taking photos for the nonprofit's newsletter, her camera capturing candid moments of connection and healing. When she snapped a picture of Samantha laughing with a group of veterans' kids, Luke felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't expected. Dad, Emily called out, come join us for the group photo. Luke made his way over, ending up next to Samantha in the crowd. As Emily set up her tripod, Samantha's shoulder brushed against his arm. The contact was brief but electric. Smile, everyone, Emily shouted. Just then, Luke's phone vibrated in his pocket. He usually ignored calls during events, but something made him check it. The caller ID showed City Hall. Sorry, I need to take this, he muttered, stepping away from the group. Samantha watched his expression change as he listened to the caller. His jaw tightened, and his free hand clenched into a fist. When did this decision come down? Luke's voice was controlled but tense. No, I understand. Yes, I'll expect the official notice. Thank you for letting me know. He ended the call and stood very still, staring at nothing. Luke? Samantha approached carefully. Is everything okay? That was the city treasurer's office, he said quietly. Our funding's been frozen. Budget cuts. He ran a hand through his hair. Without that money, Operation New Start won't last 3 months. What? They can't do that. Who authorized? Brad Weston, Luke said. Assistant city manager. The color drained from Samantha's face. She took a step back, her hands trembling slightly. You know him? Luke asked, noticing her reaction. Samantha swallowed hard. He's my ex-fiancé. The silence between them stretched like a chasm. Around them, the picnic continued. Veterans laughing, children playing, Emily taking photos, but they stood in their own bubble of sudden tension. I should go, Samantha whispered. I'm sorry. I need some air. Before Luke could respond, she turned and hurried toward the parking lot. He watched her go, confusion and concern warring on his face. Later that evening, Samantha sat in her car outside her apartment, tears streaming down her face. The steering wheel was cold under her white-knuckled grip. Brad's involvement in the funding cut couldn't be a coincidence. He'd always been calculating, always looking for leverage. She remembered Luke's face when he got the news, the way he'd tried to hide his worry. In just a few weeks, he'd become important to her, more important than she'd wanted to admit. His strength, his gentleness with Emily, the way he devoted himself to helping other veterans, it all touched something deep in her heart. But now Brad's shadow had fallen across this new beginning, and she felt torn between her growing feelings for Luke and the complications of her past. Meanwhile, in his home study, Luke knelt beside his desk. The room was dark, except for his desk lamp, casting long shadows on the walls. His eyes were closed, his hands clasped tightly. Lord, he whispered, I don't understand your plan here. These veterans need us. They're counting on Operation New Start. Please, show me a way through this. On his desk lay the day's photos from Emily's camera. Happy faces, shared meals, moments of connection. And there, in one corner, a snapshot of him and Samantha standing together, both smiling, neither aware of what was coming. The evening grew deeper, and across Cedar Ridge, 2 hearts wrestled with their own storms. One fighting to save his mission, the other struggling to bridge her past and present. Neither knew how deeply their paths were about to intertwine, or how their separate struggles would soon become one. Monday morning greeted Cedar Ridge with a bitter chill. Luke's boots crunched on frost-covered gravel as he made his way to Operation New Start's headquarters. The converted church hall, with its weathered brick and proud Veterans Welcome sign, had been his second home for the past 5 years. Today, that home felt different. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed above a big cluster of worried faces. His small team, 3 part-time staff members and 2 regular volunteers, sat around the scratched conference table. Coffee cups steamed in front of them, untouched. Let's not sugarcoat this, Luke said, settling into his chair. The wooden seat creaked under his weight. The city's funding freeze means we're looking at serious cuts. I'll do everything I can to keep us running. But we might have to close. Mike, their counselor, finished. The Vietnam vet's lined face seemed to age another decade right there. Sarah, their receptionist and a Navy veteran herself, pushed her glasses up. What about the veterans who depend on us? The housing assistance program? Luke rubbed his temples. The thought of turning away homeless vets made his stomach turn. We've got enough emergency funds for 2 more weeks. After that, a knock at the door interrupted him. Through the frosted glass, a familiar silhouette appeared. Luke's heart did an unexpected flip as Samantha stepped in, carrying a laptop bag and what looked like a stack of folders. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, her voice soft but determined. But I have some ideas. Luke stood, surprised. Samantha, this isn't before you say no, she cut in. Hear me out. I'm a graphic designer with event planning experience. I've organized fundraisers, managed social media campaigns, and I know my way around grant applications. She set her things down and faced the group. I want to volunteer. Full-time. The team exchanged glances. Luke crossed his arms. We don't need charity. This isn't charity, Samantha replied, meeting his gaze steadily. This is me wanting to help veterans, just like you do. Let me contribute my skills while I look into things. Something in her tone made Luke pause. She wasn't offering pity. He could see that now in her earnest expression. Still, his pride wrestled with accepting help from someone he was just starting to date. Sarah cleared her throat. Boss, we could use the extra hands, especially someone who knows marketing. Mike nodded. Can't hurt to try something new. Luke looked around at his team's hopeful faces, then back at Samantha. She'd already pulled out her laptop and was powering it up, as if his agreement was a foregone conclusion. The corner of his mouth twitched. All right, he conceded. Where do you want to start? The next few hours transformed the old church hall. Samantha dove into work with surprising energy, tackling the chaos of their storage room first. She enlisted everyone's help in sorting through years of accumulated donations and paperwork. By afternoon, Emily showed up after school, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Dad, the place looks different already. Indeed it did. The main room had been reorganized, with clear pathways and designated areas for different services. The bulletin board, once a jumble of expired notices, now displayed fresh flyers Samantha had designed during lunch. Your dad's letting me help out, Samantha explained, sharing a smile with Emily. Want to join the revolution? Emily's face lit up. Can I redesign your website? It's kind of ancient. Hey now, Luke protested, but he was grinning. Watching his daughter and Samantha work together, heads bent over a computer screen, stirred something warm in his chest. The day flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Samantha's enthusiasm proved contagious. Even Mike, usually quiet and reserved, got excited about her ideas for a community dinner fundraiser. She had a way of listening to everyone's input that made them feel valued, heard. As evening approached, Luke found himself in his office, watching through the window as Samantha packed up her things. The setting sun painted the parking lot in orange and gold, casting long shadows across the pavement. She'd accomplished more in one day than they had in months of struggling alone. Emily popped her head in. Dad, I'm heading home to start dinner. I'll be there soon, sweetheart. He hugged her goodbye, then walked Samantha to her car. She paused before getting in, adjusting her scarf against the chilly air. Same time tomorrow? Luke nodded, hands in his pockets. Thank you. For today. For everything. Don't thank me yet, she said with a gentle smile. We're just getting started. As she waved goodbye and drove off, Luke stood in the parking lot, keys jingling in his hand. The Veterans Welcome sign caught the last rays of sunlight, glowing like a beacon. For the first time since the funding freeze, he felt something stir in his heart. Not just hope, but faith. Faith that maybe, just maybe, God hadn't forgotten about Operation New Start after all. He locked up the building, his steps lighter than they'd been that morning. Tomorrow was another day, and now they had help. Help that came not from charity, but from caring. That made all the difference in the world. Autumn sunlight warmed the weathered streets of Cedar Ridge as Luke's truck rumbled through the quiet neighborhoods. Beside him, Samantha balanced a stack of hot meal containers on her lap, the scent of homemade chili filling the cab. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore one of the Operation New Start volunteer t-shirts that she'd redesigned herself. Turn left at the bridge, Luke said, his voice gentle. Jerry usually camps under there when it gets cold. Samantha nodded, her eyes scanning the area. How long have you known him? 3 years now. Marine Corps, like me. Desert Storm veteran. Luke's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Sometimes the battles follow you home. They found Jerry exactly where Luke expected, his small tent neat despite its worn appearance. The old veteran's face lit up when he saw Luke's truck. Sergeant Tanner, Jerry called out, struggling to stand straighter. And who's this lovely lady? Jerry. Meet Samantha. She's helping us at Operation New Start. Luke grabbed 2 containers from the back. Made your favorite today. Marie's famous chili recipe. Jerry's eyes misted over. Marie's recipe? Been years since I had that, Sarge. Jerry joined them, and soon they were all sharing lunch together. Your wife's cooking was something special, Jerry said between spoonfuls. Luke's smile held a touch of sadness. That it was. Marie could make anything taste like home. He glanced at Samantha. She used to cook for the whole unit when we'd have gatherings. Said no veteran should eat alone. Is that why you started the meal program? Samantha asked softly. Luke was quiet for a moment. Partly, but mostly because of Mike, my best friend in the Corps. He set his container down, his eyes distant. We served 3 tours together. Last one, we were in Fallujah. Mike. His voice caught. He stepped on an IED. I was 10 feet behind him. Samantha's hand found his arm, squeezing gently. When I got back home, Marie was my anchor. But Mike's death, it ate at me. Still does. Luke's voice grew stronger. Started Operation New Start because I couldn't stand seeing our veterans slip through the cracks. Every meal we deliver, every veteran we help, it's for Mike. Jerry reached over, gripping Luke's shoulder. No words were needed. They finished the route by mid-afternoon, delivering meals to 6 more veterans. At their last stop, Samantha shared her own story with Sarah, a female veteran living in her car. My father was a veteran too, Samantha said, helping Sarah organize her supplies. Vietnam. He seemed fine on the outside, but inside, she took a shaky breath. I was the one who found him. I was 22. He'd left a note saying he couldn't fight the memories anymore. Luke watched as Samantha's hands trembled slightly. For years I blamed myself, she continued. Thought if I'd noticed the signs, if I'd done more. She met Sarah's understanding gaze. But now I'm learning. Sometimes the biggest act of love is forgiving yourself. The drive back to Operation New Start was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence. As they unloaded the empty containers, Emily bounded out of the office, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Dad, how was the route? She grinned at Samantha. Did he tell you about the time he tried to convince Jerry that his meatloaf was edible? Luke laughed, reaching out to ruffle his daughter's hair. Hey now, that meatloaf wasn't that bad. Dad, the dog wouldn't even eat it. Emily's eyes sparkled with mischief. You've been smiling a lot more lately, by the way. Wonder why that is? Luke felt his cheeks warm. Shouldn't you be doing homework? Already done, Emily sang out, skipping toward the truck. But fine, I'll stop teasing. For now. Samantha watched them with a soft smile, and Luke found himself noticing how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she was happy. Later that night, in her small apartment across town, Samantha sat cross-legged on her bed. A cardboard box of old photos lay open beside her. With trembling fingers, she pulled out a faded photograph. Her father in his dress uniform, proud and young, his arm around her mother at some long-ago military ball. She traced his face gently. I understand better now, Daddy, she whispered. The weight you carried, the pain you couldn't share. Tears slid down her cheeks. I forgive you. And I'm trying to forgive myself, too. Standing, she walked to her nightstand and carefully placed the photo in a simple silver frame. For the first time in 16 years, she could look at his image without feeling the sharp stab of guilt. Kneeling beside her bed, Samantha closed her eyes. Lord, she prayed softly, thank you for showing me that healing comes in unexpected ways. Help me be brave enough to keep my heart open. The photograph stood watch as she got ready for bed. Her father's smile a reminder that love persists, even through the deepest wounds. The crisp morning air nipped at Luke's nose as he stepped out of his truck, carrying boxes of donated clothes into Operation New Start's office. The cardboard containers were heavier than they looked, packed tight with winter coats, boots, and warm sweaters that local families had dropped off throughout the week. The weekend volunteer shift was just beginning, and already 3 veterans waited outside for assistance. 2 older men sharing a cigarette by the entrance, and a young woman with tired eyes clutching a worn backpack. His weathered hands gripped the cardboard tighter, determined to help as many people as he could today. The familiar weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders as he surveyed the small crowd. Each face told a story he recognized. The careful pride that masked desperation, the way they stood just far enough apart to maintain dignity while seeking help. He'd been there once, in those first dark months after coming home.
"Luke, wait up!"
Samantha's voice rang out across the parking lot. He turned to see her hurrying toward him, her dark hair dancing in the breeze like silk ribbons. She wore jeans and a soft blue sweater that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. But she wasn't alone. A woman with a camera followed close behind, her press badge catching the morning sunlight. "I hope you don't mind," Samantha said, slightly out of breath as she reached him. Her cheeks were flushed pink from the cool air and her quick pace. "This is Tara Miles from Channel 5 News. She wants to do a story about the program." Luke's first instinct was to refuse. He'd never been comfortable in the spotlight, preferring the quiet satisfaction of work done without fanfare. The idea of cameras and interviews made his jaw tighten. But before he could object, Tara stepped forward with a warm smile that seemed genuine rather than practiced. "Mr. Tanner, your work here is incredible," she said, extending her hand with professional confidence. "Community needs to hear about this, especially now with the funding issues. People don't realize how much good you're doing right here in their own backyard." Luke shifted the box in his arms, considering her words. The weight of the donations reminded him of all the people depending on this place. "Ma'am, we're just doing what needs doing. Nothing special about that." "That's exactly why people need to hear your story," Tara insisted, her voice carrying the passion of someone who believed in the power of good news. "Real heroes don't wear capes. They wear work boots and carry boxes of hope. They show up every day without fanfare, without recognition, just because it's right." Samantha touched his arm gently, her fingers warm even through his jacket sleeve. "Please, Luke, let people see the good you're doing. Maybe it'll inspire others to help." He looked at the waiting veterans, then back at Samantha's hopeful face. Her eyes held something he was beginning to recognize, not pity or charity, but genuine respect for what he'd built here. "All right," he sighed, feeling his resistance crumble. "But no fancy stuff, just the truth." Throughout the morning, Tara's camera captured the quiet dignity of their work, with unobtrusive skill. Luke helping a young veteran fill out housing forms, his patient voice explaining each line while the man's hands shook slightly from nerves or withdrawal. Samantha organizing the food pantry with careful precision, making sure each family got exactly what they needed while preserving their pride. Volunteers sorting through donations, sharing coffee and conversation with those who came seeking help, treating everyone like family rather than charity cases. The office buzzed with purposeful activity. Phone calls were made to landlords willing to work with veterans. Forms were filled out for job training programs. A woman found a winter coat that fit her teenage son perfectly, tears of relief brightening her eyes. Small victories that added up to changed lives. "What drives you to do this?" Tara asked Luke during a quiet moment when the morning rush had slowed. He paused, looking around the humble space with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in thank you notes from people they'd helped. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits of hope. "When I came home, I was lost. Figured I was alone, that nobody understood what I was carrying. But I wasn't. None of us are. Sometimes folks just need someone to remind them of that." Luke watched it from his living room, Emily beside him on the couch with her legs tucked under her. Samantha had come over too, bringing homemade chocolate chip cookies that filled the house with the warm scent of vanilla and brown sugar. The familiar comfort of his home felt different somehow with her there, more complete. "Our hometown hero isn't wearing a uniform anymore," Tara's voice narrated over footage of Luke working. The camera had caught him in unguarded moments. The gentle way he spoke to frightened veterans, the pride in his eyes when someone found a job, the quiet satisfaction of work well done. But ask any of the veterans he's helped, and they'll tell you, Luke Tanner's still serving his country, one life at a time. The piece showed interviews with veterans who'd found housing through the program. their voices thick with gratitude, as they described how Luke had given them more than just a roof, he'd given them hope. Volunteers spoke about Luke's dedication, how he remembered everyone's name and story. Even Emily appeared on screen, her young face glowing with pride as she talked about how her dad had taught her that helping others was the best way to honor those who couldn't be helped anymore. "Dad, you're famous!" Emily squealed, squeezing his arm tight enough to leave marks. Her excitement was infectious, filling the room with joy. Luke shook his head, embarrassed by the attention. Heat crept up his neck as he watched himself on television. They made it look fancier than it is. "No," Samantha said softly, her voice carrying quiet conviction. "They showed exactly who you are. Someone who sees people's worth when they can't see it themselves." His phone started buzzing with notifications almost immediately. The program's donation page was lighting up with small contributions from all over town, $20 here, $50 there, each one representing someone who'd been moved by the story. People were sharing the video online, praising the work, and asking how they could help. The comments section filled with heart emojis and words of encouragement. Later that evening, they attended a small veterans dinner at the local VFW hall. The familiar space welcomed them with the scent of coffee and the comfortable chatter of old friends. The usual crowd was there, plus a few new faces who'd seen the news story and wanted to learn more about helping. When it came time for grace, the chaplain was running late, caught in traffic from another event across town. "Samantha," Luke suggested quietly, remembering how naturally faith seemed to flow from her during their conversations. "Would you mind?" She looked startled, her eyes widening with surprise. Color rose in her cheeks as she glanced around the room full of expectant faces, but she stood slowly, smoothing her hands down her sweater with nervous energy. The room fell silent as she cleared her throat, gathering courage from somewhere deep inside. "Dear Lord," she began, her voice trembling slightly, like a bird testing its wings. "Thank you for bringing us together tonight, for the food before us, and the hands that prepared it with love. But mostly," she paused, taking a deep breath that seemed to steady her resolve. "Thank you for second chances, for showing us that even our deepest wounds can become wells of compassion for others. Thank you for brave men and women who served our country with honor, and for those who continue to serve by helping others heal." Tears glistened in her eyes like morning dew, but her voice grew stronger with each word. "Thank you for my father, who wore his uniform with pride and gave everything he had for his country. Help us understand that his struggles weren't his fault, that invisible wounds are just as real as visible ones. And thank you for people like Luke, who remind us every day that hope isn't just a word we say, it's an action we choose, again and again, even when it's hard." By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the toughest veterans wiped their cheeks discreetly, pretending to adjust their glasses or scratch their noses. Luke's heart swelled with something he hadn't felt in years, a mixture of pride, gratitude, and something deeper he wasn't quite ready to name yet. It felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. After dinner, they walked out into the cool night air. The parking lot was quiet, except for their footsteps on the asphalt and the distant hum of traffic. Above them, the stars sparkled over Cedar Ridge like diamonds scattered across black velvet, so clear and bright they seemed close enough to pluck from the sky. Without thinking, Luke reached for Samantha's hand. Her fingers were cold from the night air, but they fit perfectly between his, as if they'd been designed to belong there. She didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed gently, and they walked in comfortable silence beneath the vast sky that seemed to shine just for them, two souls finding their way back to hope under the watchful eyes of angels. Luke adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror of his truck, parked outside the Cedar Ridge Community Center. The evening air held a gentle warmth, and strings of white lights twinkled along the building's entrance. Samantha's invitation had been casual, just a community dinner to thank the volunteers. But something in Emily's knowing smile when he left home made him suspect there was more to it. As he approached the entrance, soft piano music drifted through the open doors. His footsteps slowed when he glimpsed the transformed interior through the windows. The usually plain community center sparkled with elegance, Tables draped in white linens, centerpieces of red and blue flowers, and a small stage decorated with American flags. "Surprise!" Samantha's voice carried across the room as she hurried toward him. She wore a midnight blue dress that made her eyes shine, and her smile lit up her whole face. "Don't be mad, okay?" Luke stood frozen in the doorway, taking in the scene. At least 200 people filled the room. Local business owners, veterans he'd helped, town officials, and families from the community. A banner hung above the stage. "Operation New Start. Hope never fades." "What is all this?" he managed to ask, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a fundraiser," Samantha explained, touching his arm gently. "The whole town wanted to help once they heard about the funding freeze." "Everyone here believes in what you do, Luke." Emily appeared beside them, looking grown-up in a burgundy dress. "Don't just stand there, Dad. People are waiting to talk to you." The next hour passed in a blur of handshakes and heartfelt conversations. Local business owners presented checks and pledges of support. The owner of Murphy's Hardware promised free supplies for their building maintenance. The grocery store committed to monthly food donations. But it was the veterans' testimonies that brought tears to Luke's eyes. One by one, they stood at the microphone, sharing how Operation New Start had changed their lives. "I was living in my car when Sergeant Tanner found me," a young woman in her 30s said, her voice trembling. "He didn't just give me a meal. He gave me back my dignity. Today I have my own apartment and a job teaching art therapy to other vets." The Cedar Ridge Veterans Choir took the stage, their voices rising in perfect harmony with "You Raise Me Up." Luke felt Samantha's hand slip into his, and he squeezed it gently, grateful for her presence. When it was his turn to speak, Luke approached the microphone slowly, his heart full. The room fell silent, waiting. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, his deep voice carrying across the quiet room. "As a Marine, I learned that actions speak louder than words. But tonight," he paused, gathering his thoughts. "Tonight, I'm reminded that no soldier fights alone. Hope is the only uniform that never fades, and thanks to all of you, that hope will continue to change lives." Applause thundered through the room. As the music started again, Samantha tugged at his hand. "Dance with me?" Luke hesitated only a moment before leading her to the dance floor. Other couples joined them as the band played a slow song. He held her carefully, as if she might disappear like she had that first night at the cafe. But this time, she was solid and real in his arms. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just for this, but for coming back, for trying again." Samantha looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "I was so scared that night," she admitted. "Scared of feeling too much. Scared of losing someone else I cared about." From across the room, Emily raised her phone, capturing the moment. She turned to her friend Rachel and whispered, "He's happy again." The crowd around them seemed to fade away as they swayed to the music. Luke felt something settle in his heart, a peace he hadn't known since losing his wife. Looking down at Samantha, he smiled softly. "Maybe some ghosts are worth waiting for," he murmured. Samantha's answering smile shone through her tears as the room erupted in cheers and applause. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Operation New Start, casting long shadows across the empty desks. Luke whistled as he unlocked the front door, still, riding high from last night's successful fundraiser. The memory of dancing with Samantha brought a smile to his weathered face. Everything felt right for the first time in years. He flicked on the lights and headed to his office, coffee in hand. A thick manila envelope sat in his inbox, marked urgent in red letters. Setting down his cup, Luke tore it open. His hands froze as he read the first page. The city's official letterhead stared back at him, topped with yesterday's date. It was an emergency funding approval notice, fast-tracking the restoration of their budget plus an additional grant. But what made his stomach turn was the signature at the bottom. Bradford J. Weston, Director of Municipal Affairs. Brad Weston, Samantha's ex-fiancé. Luke's coffee grew cold as he read through the rest of the paperwork. Special considerations, expedited processing, executive override. Every page bore Brad's signature or initials. This wasn't just a regular approval. This was pulled strings and called-in favors. "Morning, boss." Jenny, one of the volunteer coordinators, poked her head in. Her smile faded when she saw his face. "Everything okay?" "Fine," Luke managed, his voice tight. "Just reviewing some paperwork." The morning crawled by in a fog. Luke went through the motions, answering emails, taking calls, but his mind kept circling back to those documents, to Brad's signature, to Samantha. Around 11, he heard her familiar footsteps in the hallway. She appeared in his doorway, bright-eyed and carrying a box of fresh pastries. "Thought we could all use a sugar boost after last night's excitement?" Luke stood slowly, the papers clutched in his hand. "When were you going to tell me?" "Tell you what?" Her smile wavered at his tone. He held up the approval notice. "About this. About how your ex-fiancé suddenly decided to save the day." Color drained from Samantha's face as she saw Brad's signature. "Luke, I had no idea save it." His voice was cold, controlled. The voice he'd used giving orders in combat. "You didn't think I needed to know you were working your connections, using your ex to fix poor Luke's problems?" "That's not what happened." Samantha set down the pastry box, her hands trembling. "I never asked Brad for anything. I wouldn't." "Then how did this happen?" Luke slapped the papers down on his desk. "Magic? Or maybe you thought I wouldn't notice? That I'd be so grateful for the help, I wouldn't care how it came about?" Tears welled in Samantha's eyes. "Please, just let me explain. I thought we were partners." Luke cut her off, his voice cracking slightly. "Not a project. Not some broken veteran for you to save." "Luke, that's not, I trusted you." The words came out barely above a whisper, heavy with hurt. "I let you in. Let you see." He shook his head, turning away. "I can't do this." "Don't push me away," Samantha pleaded. "Not like this. What we have is real. What we had," Luke corrected, still facing the window, "was a mistake. I think you should go." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, he heard a choked sob, followed by retreating footsteps. The main door clicked shut, and Luke's shoulders sagged. He spent the rest of the day in a daze, barely registering the concerned looks from his staff. When evening came, he sent everyone home early, claiming he needed to catch up on paperwork. The office grew dark as the sun set. Luke sat at his desk, staring at the Hope Restored banner they'd hung just yesterday. The word hope flickered in the dim light, the letters seeming to mock him. His phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Dad, where are you? Dinner's getting cold." He couldn't bring himself to reply. Across town, Samantha sat in her childhood bedroom, tears falling onto her mother's shoulder. "I'm leaving, Mom," she whispered. "I can't stay in Cedar Ridge anymore." Margaret stroked her daughter's hair. "Are you sure that's what you want?" "It doesn't matter what I want." Samantha's voice was hollow. "I tried so hard not to let my fears control me, to believe in love again. But maybe some wounds are too deep to heal." Back at Operation New Start, Luke remained motionless in his chair. The funding approval papers lay scattered across his desk, Brad Weston's signature a stark reminder of his wounded pride. The Hope banner continued its erratic dance in the darkness, matching the faltering rhythm of his heart. Outside, a car alarm briefly disrupted the quiet. Luke barely noticed. His mind kept replaying Samantha's tears, her pleas to explain. But the voice of his hurt pride had spoken louder than his heart. And now, the silence was deafening. The empty office felt like a tomb around him, filled with the ghosts of what might have been. He'd pushed away the one person who had made him feel alive again, all because his pride couldn't bear the thought of owing anything to Brad Weston. The banner flickered one more time, then went dark as the timer on the lights clicked off. Luke sat alone in the shadows, surrounded by the ruins of his second chance at happiness. The morning sun struggled to pierce through heavy clouds, matching Luke's dark mood as he walked into Operation New Start. His footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. 3 days had passed since he'd pushed Samantha away, and the building felt as hollow as his heart. "Morning, Mr. Tanner," said Jerry, one of the veteran volunteers. His usual cheerful greeting now carried a note of concern. Luke managed a weak nod and headed straight to his office. The hope-restored banner from the fundraiser still hung crookedly on the wall, mocking him. He couldn't bring himself to take it down, just like he couldn't delete Samantha's number from his phone. The morning dragged by in a fog of paperwork and avoided calls. Every time the phone rang, his heart jumped, hoping it might be her, dreading it might be her. He let them all go to voicemail. Around noon, Emily appeared in his doorway. Her brown eyes, so like her mother's, studied him with worry.
Dad, you need to eat something. I'm fine, sweetie,
he mumbled, shuffling papers he wasn't really reading. No, you're not. She stepped into the office, crossing her arms. You haven't been fine since Friday. The volunteers can see it. I can see it. Luke leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. The stubble reminded him he hadn't shaved in days. I'm just tired. You're hiding. Emily corrected, just like you did after Mom died. The words hit him like a physical blow. That's different, is it? Emily moved closer, perching on the edge of his desk. Samantha's been calling me, you know. She wants to explain. Luke stood up abruptly, his chair rolling back against the wall. There's nothing to explain. I was a fool to think. He stopped, his throat tight. To think what? That you deserve to be happy again? He turned to stare out the window, watching rain begin to fall. I built this place to help others, Em, not to be someone's charity case. Is that really what you think this was about? Emily's voice cracked. Dad, Samantha loves you. Anyone with eyes can see that. The word love made his chest ache. He remembered Samantha's face at the gala, how she'd looked at him while they danced. Had he imagined the tenderness there? The donations have slowed down, he said instead, changing the subject. 2 volunteers quit yesterday. Because the heart of this place is gone. Emily threw up her hands. You two brought something special here. The veterans felt it. Everyone felt it. Luke walked over to the coffee maker, his movements mechanical. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he poured a cup anyway. I'm not what she needs, Em. She deserves better than a broken old Marine with too much pride. Emily protested, but Luke held up his hand. Please, he said softly, I need to work. Emily stood there a moment longer then, walked to the door. She paused, turning back. Mom would want you to be happy, Dad. She told me that before she died. The words followed Luke home that evening, haunting him as he pulled into his driveway. The house loomed dark and silent. No warm lights or dinner smells welcoming him anymore. No Samantha waiting with a gentle smile and a cup of tea. He hung his jacket in the closet, and something soft fell from the shelf above. His heart clenched as he recognized Samantha's cream-colored scarf, the one she'd worn to their first coffee date, when she'd been so nervous her hands shook around her cup. He remembered how she'd fidgeted with the fringe, explaining about her father, trusting him with her pain. Luke sank into his armchair, the scarf clutched in his hands. It still held a trace of her perfume, something light and floral, the same scent that had surrounded him when they danced at the gala, when everything had seemed possible. The emptiness of the house pressed in around him, pictures on the walls, Emily's graduation, his Marine unit, Sarah's last Christmas, all seemed to watch him with judgment. Even the silence felt accusatory. Lord, he whispered into the darkness, his voice rough with unshed tears, if this is what I get for trying again. He twisted the soft fabric between his fingers. Maybe I wasn't meant for second chances. The scarf blurred in his vision as the tears finally came. Outside, the rain continued to fall, drumming against the windows like a heartbeat he couldn't silence. The afternoon light poured through the windows, casting long, soft shadows that danced across Luke's living room. The rays illuminated little dust motes, drifting lazily in the air, highlighting the stillness that had settled around him like a thick blanket. As he mindlessly folded laundry, his hands worked methodically, but his thoughts wandered elsewhere. It had been 3 long days of silence, encompassing the house and everything in it, filling every furred corner with an echoing emptiness. Even Emily, typically effervescent and full of chatter, had grown quiet, her clever eyes darting to her father with concern as she observed him retreating inward once again.
Just as the weight of solitude began to sink deeper, a gentle knock at the door made Luke pause mid-motion, a familiar sound that quickened his heart. It startled him, a small beacon of hope, but when he opened the door, the sight of Margaret Reyes standing there brought mixed emotions. Instead of the tearful, desperate woman from her last visit, she appeared composed and dignified. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back in a refined style, and her eyes held a warm understanding, rather than the sorrowful glimmer of before. "Mr. Tanner," she said softly, her voice like a soothing balm, "may I come in for a moment?" Luke stepped aside, his throat suddenly tight. It felt as if the house took a collective breath, bracing itself for what was to come. Margaret settled onto the edge of his couch, smoothing her skirt with the practiced grace of someone who had borne her fair share of burdens. "I'm not here to plead this time," she began, her voice steady and serene, filled with a kind of quiet strength. "I just wanted to thank you." Luke frowned, confusion washing over him, replacing the tension that had built up in his chest. "Thank me? For what? Breaking your daughter's heart?" The words came out more bitter than he intended. Margaret shook her head, a small and unexpected smile playing at her lips, infusing the air with a glimmer of hope. "For helping her find her courage again. Did you know Samantha applied for a trauma counseling certification course last month? She was accepted." The news hit Luke like a physical blow, leaving him momentarily stunned. He sank deeply into his armchair, gripping the armrests as if they were the only thing anchoring him. She never mentioned it. He finally managed to say, his voice cracking under the weight of the revelation. "Because she wasn't sure she could face it," Margaret explained, leaning forward slightly, her expression earnest. "Working with veterans, hearing their stories. She was terrified it would bring back all the pain of losing her father." She paused, her eyes reflecting a mixture of empathy and pride as she continued. "But meeting you, working at Operation New Start, it showed her she was stronger than her fears." Luke felt a knot tighten in his chest as memories rushed back, vivid and clear. He could almost see Samantha's gentle interactions with the veterans during the food drives, recall how she listened intently to their stories, never judging, but instead offering them the grace of her understanding. He remembered the way her hands had stopped shaking when she prayed at that community dinner, radiating a newfound strength as if she had found her place among them. "When does she leave?" The question slipped from his lips, barely above a whisper, thick with emotion. With deliberate care, Margaret reached into her purse, retrieving a folded bus schedule that seemed to hold the weight of everyone's hopes and dreams. "Tomorrow morning, she's taking the 9:15 to Portland." She placed the paper on the coffee table between them, and Luke's eyes were drawn to the red circle marking the departure time, like a countdown clock announcing an unwelcome reality. "I don't understand," Luke said, his voice rough with confusion and incredulity. "Why are you telling me this?" Margaret stood up, straightening her jacket with a sense of dignified purpose. "Because love isn't about deserving, Luke. It's about grace. And sometimes, pride makes us forget that the very thing hurting us might be God's way of healing us." Her words hung in the air, heavy with wisdom. With a final, resolute look, she walked toward the door, but then turned back one last time. "You gave my daughter the courage to believe in love again. Please don't let pride take away what love restored." As the door closed softly behind her, Luke was left alone with the bus schedule, the low hum of his thoughts swirling around him, amplifying the weight of her words. He picked up the paper. His fingers traced the red circle as if it could connect him to Samantha in some magical way. The morning sun would soon take her away, just as surely as his stubborn pride had done earlier, driving a wedge between them. Through the window, he watched Margaret's car pull away from the curb, a symbol of hope disappearing into the distance. The paper trembled in his grip as an avalanche of emotions he had been suppressing for days finally broke through the careful walls he had constructed around his heart. Quiet footsteps on the stairs announced Emily's presence. She had probably heard everything. His daughter had always been too perceptive for her own good, a beauty and resilience passed down from her mother. She stood beside him at the window, her young face animated and thoughtful, a curious blend of innocence and wisdom. "Dad," she said gently, the softness of her tone wrapping around him like a comforting hug. Maybe God's giving you a second chance, too. Luke stared down at the bus schedule. Margaret's words echoing in his mind, a striking reminder about love and grace, while his daughter's simple truth settled into his heart like a key, turning in a long rusted lock, unlocking emotions he never thought he'd dare to confront. Thunder rumbled across Cedar Ridge as Luke jerked awake in his armchair, Margaret's bus schedule still clutched in his hands. The clock on the wall showed 5:45 a.m. Samantha's bus left at 6:30. His heart hammered against his ribs as he leaped to his feet. "Dad?" Emily appeared at the bottom of the stairs in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "What's wrong?" "I can't let her leave," Luke said, grabbing his old leather jacket from the coat rack. "Not like this." Rain pelted the windows as he fumbled for his truck keys. They slipped through, his trembling fingers hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp clang. As he bent to retrieve them, memories flooded his mind. Samantha's nervous smile at the cafe, her gentle way with the veterans, how she'd memorized everyone's coffee orders at the nonprofit. Emily rushed forward, snatching up the keys before he could reach them. "I'm coming with you, Emily. No arguments," she said firmly, already pulling on her rain boots. "You taught me Marines never leave anyone behind, remember?" A small smile tugged at Luke's lips despite his anxiety. His daughter's determination reminded him so much of her mother. "All right, but hurry." They raced out into the storm, rain immediately soaking through their clothes. Luke's old truck roared to life, windshield wipers fighting against the downpour as they pulled onto the empty streets. The town was just beginning to wake, streetlights still glowing against the dark morning sky. "Turn left here," Emily directed, studying the schedule. "The station's 3 blocks down." Luke gripped the steering wheel tighter, his mind racing faster than the truck. He'd been such a fool, letting his pride blind him to what really mattered. Samantha hadn't tried to fix him or his problems. She'd simply shown him he wasn't alone in his brokenness. A red light forced them to stop, and Luke drummed his fingers impatiently on the wheel. In the glow of the traffic signal, he noticed Emily watching him with a knowing look. "What?" he asked. "You love her, don't you?" The question hung in the air between them. Luke swallowed hard, remembering how Samantha's eyes had lit up when she talked about her father's old military stories, how she'd stayed late at the nonprofit organizing files just to keep him company, how she'd made him believe in second chances again. "Yeah," he whispered. "I do." The light turned green, and Luke pressed the gas. They turned onto Main Street, where the bus station's neon sign flickered through the rain. His heart nearly stopped when he saw a Greyhound bus idling out front, its engine running. "There!" Emily pointed to a familiar figure in a blue raincoat, wheeling a small suitcase toward the bus doors. Luke barely remembered to put the truck in park before jumping out. The rain was coming down in sheets now, instantly drenching him as his boots hit the puddle-filled pavement. "Samantha!" he called out, his voice nearly lost in the storm. She turned, her eyes widening in surprise. The bus driver was already closing the doors, but Luke's desperate shout made him pause. "Luke?" Samantha stepped back from the bus, confusion and hope warring on her face. "What are you doing here?" He crossed the distance between them, in long strides, rain streaming down his face. Up close, he could see she'd been crying, her eyes red-rimmed and tired. The sight made his heart ache. "I'm sorry," he said, the words tumbling out. "I was wrong. So wrong. I let my pride and fear get in the way of something beautiful, something real." Samantha's lip trembled. "Luke, I never meant to." "I know," he cut in gently. "Your mother told me about the counseling course, and she helped me see something I should have known all along." He took a deep breath, rain dripping from his chin. "You didn't save my nonprofit, Sam. You saved me." She gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Behind them, the bus driver called out, "Miss, are you getting on or not?" Luke's heart pounded as he waited for her response. Emily stood by the truck, holding her breath. The whole world seemed to pause, suspended in the rain-soaked moment.
You saved me too, Samantha whispered, tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. When I met you, I was so afraid of loving someone who reminded me of my father. But you showed me that being broken doesn't mean being unfixable. Her suitcase handle slipped from her grasp, forgotten as she stepped closer to Luke. Her blue raincoat was speckled with water, her dark hair curling in the dampness. I don't want to run anymore, she said, her voice growing stronger. Not from you, not from us. Luke reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. Then stay, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Stay and help me show other veterans that hope isn't just a word on a banner. It's real. It's this. The bus driver cleared his throat. Ma'am? Final call. Samantha turned toward the bus, then back to Luke, rain streaming down both their faces as they stood on the precipice of change. Stay, Luke repeated softly. Please. The bus station's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the rain-slicked floor as Luke stood before Samantha, water dripping from his jacket. Other passengers paused mid-step, sensing the electricity in the air. Emily hung back near the entrance, giving them space but ready to support her father. I was wrong, Luke said, his voice rough with emotion. So wrong, Sam. Samantha clutched her travel bag tighter, her knuckles white. Luke, please. He held up his hand. Let me say this while I still have the courage. He took a deep breath, his military bearing softening as he met her eyes. I let pride blind me. When I saw those papers with Brad's signature, all I could think was that I'd become someone's charity case again. An elderly woman, waiting nearby, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The bus driver, who had been about to close the doors, leaned against the steering wheel to listen. After losing Sarah, my wife, I built walls, wrapped myself in duty and routine, because it felt safer. Luke's voice cracked slightly. Then you came along with your kind heart and your gentle spirit, and suddenly those walls started cracking. Samantha's lips trembled as she blinked back tears. A drop escaped, trailing down her cheek. You didn't just help the nonprofit, Sam. You helped everyone there feel seen, valued. Luke stepped closer, his boots squeaking on the linoleum. You brought coffee to Jerry when his arthritis was acting up. You remembered Mike's grandson's name. You stayed late organizing the food pantry without anyone asking. The morning sun began breaking through the clouds outside, sending rays through the station's grimy windows. They caught the tears now flowing freely down Samantha's face. I was so caught up in my wounded pride that I forgot what grace looks like. Luke continued, his voice growing stronger. Grace isn't about deserving help. It's about accepting it with humility, just like God's grace. You taught me that. Samantha's bag slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. I was scared, she whispered, when I saw you with those veterans, how they looked up to you. And all I could think was, what if he leaves too? What if he's strong like Dad was, but breaks just the same? Luke's heart ached at the pain in her voice. Around them, other travelers had stopped pretending not to listen, drawn into their story of healing and hope. After Dad died, Samantha continued, wiping her eyes. I promised myself I'd never love anyone who might leave me like that. I'd keep my heart safe. But then you came along, with your quiet strength and your dad jokes. A wet laugh escaped her throat. Several onlookers smiled through their own tears. And suddenly I was terrified because I couldn't stop my heart from caring. So when Brad showed up at my office asking about the nonprofit's paperwork, I froze. I should have told you, but I was already looking for reasons to run. Luke took her trembling hands in his. They were cold from anxiety, and he wrapped them in his warm grip. Then, let's stop running. Together. His voice was gentle but firm. I can't promise I'll never struggle, or that the memories won't sometimes hurt. But I can promise to face them with you, if you'll let me. The bus driver, a weathered man with kind eyes, started clapping softly. The sound spread through the station as other passengers joined in, creating a moment of shared joy in the usually dreary space. Samantha stepped closer to Luke, squeezing his hands. I'm tired of running, she admitted, tired of letting fear win. Me too, Luke smiled, reaching up to brush away her tears with his thumb.
Emily appeared beside them, picking up Samantha's forgotten bag. So, does this mean you're staying? Samantha looked between father and daughter, seeing the hope in their eyes. The same hope she'd first noticed in Luke's dating profile all those weeks ago.
Yes, she said. I'm staying. The other passengers burst into enthusiastic applause.
The elderly woman who'd been crying offered Samantha a tissue from her purse. Even the janitor paused his mopping to grin at the scene. Luke and Samantha walked hand in hand toward the exit, Emily trailing behind them with a satisfied smile. As they stepped outside, the rain had stopped completely. Sunlight broke through the clouds in golden shafts, and there, arching across the morning sky, stretched a brilliant rainbow. Nature's own symbol of promises kept and grace renewed. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee through the open windows of Operation New Start's newly renovated community room. 6 weeks had passed since that rainy morning at the bus station, and the change was visible everywhere, from the freshly painted walls to the bulletin boards overflowing with success stories and event flyers. Luke stood in the doorway of his office, watching Samantha arrange chairs for the morning's family support group. She wore a navy cardigan that matched the new center logo she'd designed, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. The morning light caught the silver cross necklace he'd given her last week, making it sparkle.
Need any help with those?
He called out, unable to keep from smiling as she tried to carry 3 folding chairs at once.
I've got it, Marine,
she teased, but accepted his help anyway. Though you could check if Emily finished setting up the coffee station, these veteran spouses won't survive my story-sharing session without caffeine. As if on cue, Emily burst through the front door, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Already done. And I brought those muffins Mrs. Henderson made for the group. She set a basket of still warm banana muffins on the welcome table, then gave Samantha a quick hug. Can I sit in on today's session? I finished my homework early. Luke watched the easy affection between them, remembering how worried he'd once been about Emily accepting someone new in their lives. Now the two were thick as thieves, often ganging up on him when he worked too late or forgot to eat lunch. Ask Sam, sweetie. It's her group, he said, adjusting the American flag hanging near the entrance. Samantha pretended to consider it seriously, then winked. Well, since you're practically my assistant coordinator already. The center had come alive in ways Luke never imagined possible. What started as a simple food bank and job assistance program had grown into a true community hub. Veterans and their families filled the rooms daily, finding not just practical help, but genuine connection. The transformation wasn't just in the building. Luke saw it in himself too. The weight of loneliness that had pressed down on him for so long had lifted. He caught himself humming sometimes, something he hadn't done since Sarah passed. Even his prayers felt different, less like desperate pleading and more like grateful conversation. First group's arriving, Emily announced, straightening her junior volunteer badge proudly. 3 women entered, looking nervous but determined. Luke recognized them from the intake forms, all married to veterans struggling with PTSD. Samantha greeted each one by name, her genuine warmth putting them at ease immediately. Welcome to New Beginnings, she said, gesturing to the circle of chairs. This is a safe space. Whatever you're carrying, whatever you're feeling, you're not alone anymore. Luke's chest tightened with pride. 6 weeks ago, Samantha had barely been able to talk about her own father's struggles. Now, here she was, turning her pain into purpose, helping others find light in their darkness. The morning unfolded with quiet intensity. More families arrived, filling the room with murmured conversations and occasional laughter. Luke worked in his office, door open to hear the gentle buzz of healing taking place. Around noon, Emily knocked on his doorframe. Dad, the Cedar Ridge Veterans Choir is here for their first practice. They want to know where to set up. Tell them to use the main hall, he said, standing to help, and see if Mr. Garcia remembered his sheet music this time. The choir members filtered in, their familiar faces brightening the space. These were men and women who'd served across different eras, different branches, but found unity in song. Luke helped arrange their chairs while Samantha's group wrapped up in the other room. "What's on the program today, Charlie?" Luke asked the choir director, a retired Air Force chaplain. "Thought we'd start with an old favorite," Charlie replied, shuffling through his music sheets. "Amazing Grace." "Seems fitting, given all the grace that's been flowing through this place lately." Luke nodded, emotion catching in his throat. He watched as Samantha's group members hugged goodbye, many with lighter expressions than when they'd arrived. She caught his eye across the room and smiled. That warm, knowing smile that still made his heart skip. The choir began their warm-ups as Samantha and Emily joined him near the entrance. The familiar notes of Amazing Grace filled the air, each voice blending in perfect harmony. Luke wrapped his arm around Samantha's shoulders, drawing her close. "Listen to that," she whispered, leaning into him. "Remind you of anything?" He knew she was thinking of that first veterans' dinner where she'd said grace the night everything started changing. "Reminds me that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as second chances." Emily rolled her eyes good-naturedly at their sentiment, but her smile was bright as she watched them. The choir's voices swelled, carrying the timeless message of redemption through the halls of their restored center. The music wrapped around them like a blessing, and Luke found himself overwhelmed by gratitude. This was what grace looked like, not just in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in everyday miracles, in second chances, in love that refused to quit. The spring sun warmed the freshly painted walls of the Tanner Veterans Hope Center. Cheerful red, white, and blue bunting decorated the entrance, swaying gently in the breeze. Rows of white folding chairs dotted the green lawn, filled with familiar faces from Cedar Ridge, veterans, volunteers, and townspeople who'd become like family over the past 6 months. Luke adjusted his tie, standing off to the side of the small stage they'd set up for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. His hands trembled slightly as he reviewed his speech cards. Emily appeared beside him, phone in hand, already recording everything for the center's social media pages. "Dad, you look great," she said, straightening his Marine Corps pin. "Stop fidgeting." He smiled at his daughter, marveling at how grown-up she seemed lately. "When did you get so wise?" "Must be all those pep talks from Samantha." Emily winked, panning her camera across the crowd. The mention of Samantha made Luke's heart warm. He spotted her near the entrance, clipboard in hand, directing the catering staff with gentle efficiency. She wore a simple blue dress that matched the new center's colors, her dark hair caught up in an elegant twist. When she caught his eye, her whole face lit up with that smile he'd grown to cherish. Mayor Thompson stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll please take your seats, we're about to begin." The crowd settled in, a sea of proud faces, turned toward the stage. Luke felt a familiar squeeze on his arm as Samantha joined him. "Ready, soldier?" she whispered. "With you here? Always." The ceremony began with the Pledge of Allegiance, led by a group of young scouts. Then came the speeches, first the mayor, praising the center's impact on the community, followed by several veterans whose lives had been transformed by Operation New Start. When it was Samantha's turn to speak, Luke watched with pride as she approached the podium with quiet confidence. Gone was the anxious woman who'd once been too scared to meet him for coffee. 6 months ago, she began, her voice clear and strong, "I was running away from pain, from love, from hope itself. But God had other plans." She paused, meeting Luke's eyes. Sometimes healing comes through the very things we fear most. This center isn't just about providing services. It's about creating a space where broken hearts can find wholeness again, where isolation gives way to community, and where fear transforms into faith. Emily squeezed Luke's hand as they listened. He could see tears glistening in his daughter's eyes, matching his own. Finally, it was Luke's turn. He stood at the podium, looking out at the faces before him, faces that had become family. "When I started Operation New Start years ago, it was just me in a borrowed church basement. Today, we're dedicating this beautiful facility, but more than that, we're dedicating ourselves to a simple truth. No one walks alone." He gripped the edges of the podium, emotion thick in his voice. "This center is for all who've lost their way and found their way back through love. It's for the veteran sleeping in his car,
who just needs someone to believe in him again. It's for the family struggling to understand PTSD. It's for everyone who's ever felt too broken to deserve a second chance. The red ribbon stretched across the entrance, fluttered in the breeze as Luke continued. My late wife Sarah used to say that grace shows up in unexpected places. I've learned she was right. Sometimes it shows up in a daughter's wisdom, he smiled at Emily, or in a stranger's courage to try again. His eyes found Samantha's. And sometimes it shows up in a missed coffee date that turns into the greatest blessing of your life. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Mayor Thompson handed Luke the oversized scissors, and with Samantha and Emily on either side of him, he cut the ribbon. Applause erupted as red, white, and blue balloons were released into the clear spring sky. The celebration continued into the afternoon. Tables of food appeared, music played, and tours of the newly renovated facility began. Luke found himself constantly amazed by the details Samantha had incorporated, from the peaceful meditation garden to the cozy family counseling rooms decorated in soothing colors. As the sun began its descent, Emily gathered everyone for photos beneath the new sign. Its clean lines and modern design somehow managed to look both professional and welcoming, just like Samantha herself had envisioned. Okay, Dad and Samantha first, Emily directed, backing up with her camera ready. Standing under the sign that read, Tanner Veterans Hope Center, where grace meets courage, Luke wrapped his arm around Samantha's waist. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and somewhere in the distance, the Veterans Choir began singing Amazing Grace. Luke glanced upward, thinking of Sarah, of Samantha's father, of all the paths that had led to this moment. For the first time in decades, he felt complete peace, not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose, of love, of grace. Thank you, Lord, for second chances, he whispered. Samantha rested her head on his shoulder, her hand finding his. Around them, laughter and music filled the air. The scent of spring flowers drifted from the new garden beds. Emily's camera clicked, capturing the moment forever. Sometimes grace arrives not when we expect it, but when we finally stop hiding from it. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Luke Tanner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.